Ladies and gentlemen, one of the heartening things about coming here is that I walk around, people like yourselves come up to me and they shake me by the hand and they look in my eyes and they tell me how they started wargaming and how some book or other of mine got them started. This is very heartening. It's heartening because I know that the wonderful luxury life I've led has been due to all the money they've spent on my books. But above that, we all think at times how we got into this, don't we? Because this is a marvellous, bloodless military hobby, a military preoccupation. And it's really, in a sense, you can almost say it's controlled your life. We wouldn't be here. This whole affair wouldn't be here if it wasn't for wargaming. I'm always preaching this, that wargaming is a social pastime. Old Hal Thingman said in his magazine a couple of issues ago that the least interesting thing about wargaming was fighting the actual battles. I think the most interesting thing about wargaming is the way it brings us all together. The different types of guys, whether you come here and you meet guys that you haven't seen since last year, or you meet new people you've never seen before, or whether it's your local parochial group who you meet every Wednesday night, like I meet my lads, and it's a great feeling of comradeship. I mean, it has certain rules to it, like as you've probably heard me say before. Our cardinal rule is that the game has got to finish by 9:45, so that we get up to the pub before it closes. And that is a very important thing. So what I thought I'd do, I thought I'd go in today to how I got involved in this, and I hope that while I'm talking, it sort of sets things going in your minds and you think to yourself, oh yes, it's similar to the way that I got involved in it. Because really what I want you to do, I want you to ask yourself, what would I have done with my life if I hadn't got involved with wargaming? I mean, you think what an empty gap there would have been. I mean, you might have taken up some passive pursuit like ice hockey or basketball. you could have only done those to a certain age. I mean, you can do this. Look at me, look how old I am, and I'm still going at it. You can do this until the very end. I mean, when you're 96, you're in your deathbed there, and you just bring yourself up and you raise your arms to heaven, and with your last breath you say, why are you taking me now? There's some rules I haven't tried out. And the quality of your life is so improved by people and friends. There's a lot of I mean, I come here every year and I stand up here and I preach at you like this and I talk away, and you know my attitude towards comradeship and friends and loyalties, and everything I've ever done in life, everything I've ever been, everything I've ever become, I owe to the comradeship that I first learned in the British Army. My wife says the British Army has a lot to answer for. But apart from that, everything I've ever done is geared up to comradeship. It's not that I've got to have people around me all the time, because I like my seclusion the same as the rest of you. I like to be on my own sometimes and read a book and that. But it's lovely to mix with people who speak the same language, isn't it? You go to work, you go to your office, your factory or whatever, and there's a load of Wallies around there. I'm sorry, that's an English expression we use. I was fighting a war game with Wally Simon once, and he took great exception to the fact that I called the Arab enemy Wallies. But you know, there's these guys you mix with, and you haven't really got anything in common with them except that last shipment to Venezuela, or are you going to buy this or buy that, or does the shop front need repainting? I mean, it's all business like stuff. But with us, you can talk about things, you can argue about them. I mean, we've got one marvellous cardinal argument going all the time, haven't we? We've got our rules, because as I said yesterday, there are the same number of sets of rules as there are people wargaming. And nobody understands anybody else's rules, and nobody has any faith in anybody else's rules. I mean, you can always argue about that if other things fail. And the big thing about it is that the wargaming is only the tip of the iceberg. It's only the fringe of it all. Think of all the things it leads on to. Think about coming here, for example. I mean, this is an adjunct. You come here, and arising from this, other things going to get. Now, I've got a list of things here that, so far as I'm concerned, have arisen from wargaming. Now, the first thing is clubs. You have war games clubs. We started a war games club in Southampton in about 1960. And some of those lads who are in that Wargames club, they're quite big shots around now. Julian Humphreys was a little boy there, about 13. His mother used to bring him to our Saturday afternoon meetings. And Julian Humphreys is now the public relations officer at the National Army Museum in London, a real big wheel. It's wonderful. He would never have got into a job like that had he not got into wargaming as a schoolboy. He was in the same class as my son. So you get your clubs. Now, we used to have this club, and we called it the Wessex Wargaming Club. And we met, much against our will, at an odd institution called the Temperance Hall. Now, this was a joke, really, because a lot of the guys were far from temperate. We used to meet in this place, and we were up on the top floor, and every now and then you'd come across old ladies and old gentlemen scurrying up and down. We never really found out what they were doing, where they lived there, what they were doing. And we used to have this club, and we used to meet every Saturday afternoon, and the first thing we'd do, we'd have a speaker. I remember the very first speaker we ever had was a man who possibly beyond your recognition, but he's still alive. He was a very famous man in the British model soldier world and an absolute authority on British uniforms, a man called W.H. Carman, Bill Carman. Bill Carman was a real authority, and he came and spoke to us about uniforms. He was very dry, I remember, witty man. And I think the second one was David Chandler. And it went along like this, you see. And there was all of us mature sort of guys there, listening avidly to these people, we're looking at them with admiring eyes, and they were all our sons and the youngsters all sort of sitting there biting their nails and sort of saying and showing each other the latest figures they bought from our fix and all that, you see. And I could hardly wait till 4:30 when the wargaming started. See? Well, after about 2 or 3 years, we decided we'd have this thing. In the first place, just how we do it properly. So we had a chairman, and we used to have an annual general meeting. Well, after about 2 or 3 years, we had this annual general meeting, you see. And those little boys, those little devils, did a coup d'etat. Oh, they voted us all out. Voted me out of secretary and the guy out of being the chairman. And they took the club over. There was a little 15-year-old boy in the chairman's seat. We were all out. And the first thing I did was to pass a resolution, no guests and no talks. So we left that group, all us older guys, we left the group, not in a huff or anything, we just thought better leave them on their own. And this club still goes, it's called the, I can't remember now, but it's got some odd name. It's in Southampton and it still goes with, of course, probably the sons of the kids who started it. And we went off to a hotel and had a luncheon meeting, and we had a guest there. And that luncheon meeting has been going solidly every month. We now have it at the Royal Southampton Yacht Club, and we've been going every month now with a speaker and a lunch since then, which is about over 30 years. That's one thing. Now, another thing that we got from it was the Wessex Military Dining Club. Now, we got a lot of the older guys. I said to them, would it be a nice idea if we could all sit around a table and have a nice meal and some wine and all just talk about military things, talk about wargaming, talk about military and that, and perhaps have a guest. I thought that's a good idea. So we started this club in 1973. Well, we started with 12 members, and 8 of those guys are still in the club, still with us. I think 1 left and 3 have died. And we've got Jim Dunning, who was a well-known commando leader during the war. Last year he was president of the British Commando Association. We've got Colonel Hugh Cook, who commanded the Duke of Wellington Regiment on D-Day, and they came in over the beaches. And I went to the D-Day beaches with him a couple of, before last May, before the D-Day, and we were walking on the beaches, and there's old Hugh, he's 84 with his stick. Yes, that's the wall I hid behind. And we got another guy there who was in 48 Marine Commando, a guy called Henry Phillips, came out of the army, became Chief Constable of Hampshire. Now, I often say to that guy, you know, if I'd have been serving with you, I'd be much more frightened of you than I was of the Germans, because he's a very regimental guy. And we sit there and we have this marvellous dinner. If any of you come to England any time, you give me a ring and you'll always be welcome to come to this dinner. It's on the 3rd Wednesday of the month, and it's held in Old Town Southampton, in a wonderful old building. And when you look out the window of the building, This is the sort of thing that really gets me. I don't know how you feel about it. Look out the window, and there's a church, Michael's church. And we had a lad down there, George Allen, from Maryland, from Rockville. He was our guest about 2 months ago. And I took him to the window. I said, "See that church, George?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, one Sunday morning in 1346, the same year as Cressy, Genoese pirates landed at the bottom of the road there, because there, just down the road is Southampton Water, where all the liners used to go from. Genoese pirates landed down there. They surged up this Bugle Street, this whole street. They went in the church and they massacred the congregation, wiped them all out." And George is looking, expecting to see them still there. But that church is the same. It's the same inside. I mean, we're going back 1346. What are you going back? 600, 700 years, aren't you? And that's the sort of thing that, you know, it all comes from. If you hadn't done wargaming, you wouldn't really know anything about that, would you? Then conventions. Well, I don't need to tell you about conventions really, because you wouldn't be here if you didn't. This is the par excellence of comradeship, isn't it? A convention, where you wargame during the day and get drunk together at night, stagger out in the morning bleary-eyed, and I think conventions are good fun. I'm very honoured and pleased that I've been invited over here to so many of them. I go to England. I went to Bob Pavlik over here, comes to England sometimes, and he takes me to English conventions. And he took me to Colours at Reading last September. It was very interesting because he was taking me around this English convention at Reading, which is about 30 miles from where I live, introducing me to people. And they were saying, "Oh yes, you know," and I think one or two of them knew me, but what an interesting thing. I'm far better known over here than I am in England. Wargaming visits. Now in the old days, there were about 6 known wargamers in England when we started, and I should be telling a bit more about that in a minute. We used to go and visit each other. Now I expect you to do the same. You probably pack up your stuff and you go off for a weekend to somebody, and you wargame solid all over the weekend, and your wife's down in the kitchen there slaving away getting the food for you, so that you're all well stuffed up, and then you stagger home on Sunday night, sometimes full of acrimony because you've had a bloody good row or about the game, and I'm never going there again. And then you've got your regular wargaming. You've got your regular guys you meet, like old Tom Desmond up there. He's got all this lot who travel about 500 miles every Wednesday night to go down in his cellar. I remember, Tom, when I was at your place once, you've got this big cellar, and you've got the table and everything for your lot, and there were some monosyllabic guys doing wargames research on the next table. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
About 4 blokes sitting there, like
Lepers.
wargames research devotees do, sitting there engrossed in it, you see, weren't conscious of the outside world at all. They didn't say hello or goodbye or anything like that, you know. And you ignored them and they ignored you, but it was in your house. Did you know who they were? Then you've got visiting battlefields. Well, again, I don't want to anticipate, because this afternoon I'm giving a talk on walking battlefields and exploring battlefields and the effect upon your wargaming that going to real life battlefields can have. But that is a very stimulating business. I mean, it's like convention on a smaller scale. For 25 years I went off battlefield walking with the same guys, and it's marvellous. You make your plans and you go, but I'll be doing with it in greater depth this afternoon. But battlefield walking is really terrific, and since I've been coming over here, I think I've done practically every one of your Civil War battlefields. I've even done Wilson's Creek and Pea Ridge. Well, somebody caught me the other night. I was boasting about going to the mall, and he caught me with 2 battlefields in Florida. I didn't know you had any Civil War fighting in Florida, but he says you did. So if anybody can give me any information, come up and whisper in my ear. Museums. Museums are wonderful. You go to, if you come to England, I'm absolutely certain, any of you will make a point, regardless of any opposition from your wife and family, of getting to London, and you'll go to the National Army Museum, and you will go to the Imperial War Museum, and you will go to the Guards Museum at Wellington Barracks, and that. If you come down my way to Southampton or Winchester, now I'm 9 miles from Winchester, which is the old capital of England, marvellous old town. Now in Winchester, it's a small town, Winchester. I I don't know how big it is compared with any of your towns. It's quite a small town, but it's a beautiful town, a lovely cathedral built in 1288. In Winchester, you've got Peninsula Barracks, which used to be occupied at the time of the Peninsula War by the Light Division, by the King's Rifle Corps. Now, they're now outside the town there, and the place has been turned into condominiums, or flats as we call them in England. But you've got there, you've got the Light Division Museum, you've got the Green Jackets Museum, you've got the Gurkha Museum, you've got the Hussars Museum, and you've got the Hampshire Regiment Museum, all in the same town. How about that? You've also got a place down the end, which you can go in, a big hall, and reputedly on the wall is King Arthur's Round Table. This great table on the wall, all sectioned off there. I think they probably borrowed it to make this recent film, First Night with Sean Connery. But there it is. Now, exhibitions, you can go to exhibitions, there's military exhibitions, and they come up and you go to them. I remember going, a rose here, I expect some of you have seen these guys doing this Wargaming with the Leonardo da Vinci things. Well, I remember going to a Leonardo da Vinci exhibition they had in London at the South Bank some years ago, and they had these full-size flying machines, actually full-size sort of tanks and things, it was marvellous looking at them. And then I come here and see these lads playing with them on the table. It was a very ingenious thing. Ceremonies and parades, now they are really beautiful. Troop in the Colour in London. I mean, the trooping of the colour in London on the Horse Guards Parade on the Queen's birthday is a wonderful spectacle. It's on television there. I've never been to the actual trooping, because it's very hard to get a ticket for that, but I've been to the rehearsals where you get another member of the royal family usually comes in place of the Queen. And then they have all these stands up round there, you see, and they don't want to waste putting them up, so in the week before that they have somebody beach retreat. One year they have the Royal Marines, they do it for 3 nights, and if you've never seen the Royal Marines band marching, that band is about the best military band, I don't know about in the world, certainly in Great Britain. They've got these marvellous drummers and they've got the white helmets and drummers and their buglers. Oh, you know, you sit there and you feel all emotional about it. And then they have the Light Division. Well, the Light Division are wonderful. They do this very fast pace. You get the little bugle majors at the front. They used to have a little one called Colin somebody or other, Colin Jackson, I think. I met him once, and he's a little man, great big bushy moustache right down like that, a big moustache there, and they have this stick, and you know the way on the Trooping of the Colour, you've got the jockey-capped drum majors and the 5 of them, one from each guard regiment, along the front there, and they're marching along, they've got their sticks as they go along in slow march there and doing it. But the Light Division, they go very quick paces here. These men, these bugle majors, they got a little stick, and they put the stick down and go like this. It's absolutely beautiful. You know, when they come first marching in, and the buglers play, and they come marching in there, my heart absolutely turns right over. It's wonderful. I remember I got very emotionally affected when I saw your Marines doing the beach and retreat at the Oima statue in Washington. That was really great too. And I think military ceremonies are marvellous. Travel all over the place to see. You can get to places like, I went to West Point last year, and I didn't actually see all the cadets in their beautiful uniforms and everything, but there was a hell of a lot of them in various sort of guises moving around there in the front of those beautiful buildings, and that was quite a thrill. And the day we got there was a Sunday, and we went to Trophy, we saw a notice or something, we went to Trophy Point, and seemingly every Sunday night at Trophy Point they have a band concert. Everybody sits there with their picnic baskets and their bottles of champagne and all that. Well, the night we went there, it was the jazz section. God, it was marvellous to sit there. I thought it was marvellous because I like that sort of jazz. And we didn't have any champagne or any hampers, but we really enjoyed it. And when I was over here this time, the other day, I lost count of the days now, I was at Annapolis. It was a Sunday, and we saw all these all I know is they couldn't have been there very long because none of the buggers marched in step. There was hundreds of them. They kept coming along and marching past. And the thing about it, with respect, ladies, the thing about it that looked so anachronistic to me was the little ladies walking with them there. You know, there's these great guys going along, and they think, look, like he's trying to keep up with them. I thought it looked, well, I'm a male chauvinist pig, my wife says. But
all the best people.
and there was also, they must have a lot of discipline there, because there were 2 or 3 of them walking on crutches. They were trying to keep up like this, you know, men and women. But all I can say is they're a hard lot, because I've never seen guys in crutches on British military parades. So you can see there's so many spin-offs from it. So many things. I mean, I've only touched the fringe of it. Now, when it all started, when I was a boy, my father and my uncle had been in World War One, and they used to chill my blood with stories about going over the top at the Somme and Passchendaele. And my uncle had been in the Australian Army. He'd landed at Gallipoli and gone ashore there. He was, in those days, before World War One, every family had a black sheep of a son. They used to pack him off to Australia, you see. Clem got packed off to Australia in 1913. You see, but Uncle Clem fooled him, because in 1914 he was back again with the Australian Army, and he was at Gallipoli, and they used to chill my blood with telling me stories. But it made me interested in model soldiers. And then my mother and father parted. My father left us, and my father had a conscience. And every Christmas and birthday, he used to give me vast numbers of boxes of Britain's soldiers. You know, the long boxes with 5 cavalry or 8 infantry in there. They were 1 shilling and 6pence in those days. I couldn't attempt to work that out in English money how much it is, let alone in American. And I had so many of them. He used to come in the taxi, drive in a taxi at this big house in Paddington in London I lived in. He used to get out with his arms full, must be looking at the window, I used to think, must be counting. 25 last time, maybe 23. Put them down, and I fought. He gave me a fort, and I've still got that fort, a great big fort, one of those with the top, and you take all the bits off and you put them, open the little door underneath, you put them inside the fort, and then you bring them out again and stick them up. And I took a photograph of it and sent it to Sotheby's about a year ago, and they were very interested in it. So when I get around to it, I might sell it, because I shall never use it. It's a beautiful thing, though. And as I say, my father used to give me these, and my friends used to come over. And of course, in those days, you hadn't got such scientific things as throwing dice. We didn't understand that. We used to do horrible things like shooting at them with 4.7 naval guns. And those naval guns that Britons used to make, they used to fire wooden pellets. They were reproductions. They had a historical background, because, as you probably know, in the Boer War, they landed a lot of guns off HMS Terrible, put them on land carriages and used them against the Boers, and you can see them with the big sort of solid wheels, you know, the thing. And of course, we all had those, because they were like some ping across the room with this piece of this wooden pellet. And then we had these howitzers I was talking about yesterday, with the shells that fire 12 feet, 9 feet and 6 feet, and they got a plumb like that over there. Oh, that was great. And I had all these figures, and all the kids from miles around used to come and play. They were all very, very jealous. And then I used to play these games, and I had so much Britain stuff. I had things like GS wagons, ambulances, pontoon sections. I expect you remember them, you've seen a picture. I had so many of them that I could do a convoy from one side of the room to the other right across. I had all this stuff. And when I was in the army, I used to think about this. I'll talk about that again in a minute. There's another thing about that. And when I came back out of the army, the house had been damaged with a bomb, and the bomb repair people had stolen all the soldiers. Taken them all away, and they took all my clothes as well. So I came out expecting to find my clothes and all my soldiers, and they're all gone. But I was about 13, 12 or 13, and I was in the library one day. I was a great reader, and I used to read very quickly, and I was very fond of. You couldn't change a book. You couldn't take a book out and change it on the same day. You could only take one book out at a time, you see. So you used to have to take books out that had a lot of reading in them. And there was an old Victorian writer, a historical boy called G.A. Henty. And he used to do wonderful books with the Allies to Peking, the Tiger of Mysore, Bugle of the 28th, and all that. Oh, they were marvellous. And Henty was an extraordinary character, because he was a man with a great big spade beard, and he was a war correspondent, one of the great war correspondents, along with Russian and people like that of the Victorian era. And he was at every war that Britain fought, him and Russell and something like that. And hence his brother actually died at Scutari in the Crimean War in the hospital at Cora there, you know, where Florence Nightingale was. And there were all these Henty books, and I used to read them avidly. In fact, I collected them when I was growing up, and I got 83, there were 83 of them, and I got 81 of them, 49 first editions. And every now and then when I go to London, I take them and I sell some. I sold 5 for £130 when I was up there last time. Because, you know, you've got to get rid of this stuff. This is one of the troubles, you see. I'm older than all of you, and as you get older, you look at all this stuff and think, my God, who's going to clear all this up when I go, you see? You want to start looking at it and think to yourself, what's going to happen? It's an alarming thought. But anyway, I'm crowding around the library, and I see a book called Little Wars on the shelf, and I pull it out, and the whole world altered. It was a revelation. It was like some biblical thing, you know, where a vision appears. Your whole life changes. Well, my life changes. Instead of all this business of shooting at them, and all my friends collected soldiers as well, and he was a sadistic son, so he used to throw darts at them. And all his soldiers had big holes in them. And, well, anything that caused casualties. And Little Wars, you see. Well, when I got it, I went through it and I found the Battle of Hook's Farm. And there's all these wonderful pictures. And I sort of analysed it. And I realised that every single figure, every single regiment that H.G. Wells had in that book, I'd got the figures for it. So we used to refight Hook's Farm day in, day out until we didn't really realise that, you know, there were other games we could play, and then we started devising it. And there's an interesting thing about H.G. Wells. Somebody was talking to me, this is a digression, but I thought you might be interested. Someone was talking to me yesterday here about Conan Doyle and the White Company, the book that apparently is just back in publication here, and you know, he wrote all the Sherlock Holmes series. Well, down the road from me in Southampton, about 10 miles, a place called Minstead. I was there, I was there a fortnight ago with my wife. It's in the New Forest. Now, H.G. Wells lived in Minstead. He wrote Sherlock Holmes there, and he wrote quite a lot of his books, and there's this beautiful house he lived in. Now, you walk from the house, up a lane, you go into the churchyard, there's a yew tree, great big yew tree, and under that yew tree is a gravestone. Arthur Conan Doyle, patriot, Englishman, and man of letters. You stand in front of you, look at it, and I said, well, what that put on my gravestone? She said, along with the bugler playing the last post, and you're burying your medals on the top of the coffee house. That's right. They're all organised. You've got to be ready. So Little Wars came into existence. We used to play, and I had a brother younger than me, 18 months, and I never could get him very interested in soldiers. But I did manage to influence him to the extent that he always asked my father and everybody to give him boxes of soldiers for his birthday and Christmas, you see, in a fervour of enthusiasm, which soon lapsed away, and I used to add his boxes of soldiers to my collection. This happened year after year, and he was a nice sort of lad, my brother. He never held any malice towards me, and so we used to fight this. Then along came the real war, the big thing, and I came home on leave one time on my embarkation leave. I was going on the Operation Torch, North African landings in 1942. And I came home on leave, and my brother was home on leave as well. And he was going somewhere out east, didn't really know where, but he thought it was east because they'd been given khaki gear and tropical kidnap. And I remember, you know, a sort of a nostalgic fit. I got him playing a war game. We got all the old British soldiers out, and we played a war game on the floor. And we might even have been Hook's Farm, and we played it from Little Wars. And I took Little Wars, I got it out the library, you see, I didn't own a copy then. I'd gone to the library and got it out. And I took Little Wars with me in my kit. I took it abroad, and I am prepared to guarantee that I'm the only soldier in the British Army who ever went into action in World War II with a copy of Little Wars in his knapsack. And I used to look at it sometimes, and actually say, "You reading that bloody book again, Featherstone? You want to get on with a bit of real soldiering." And then, of course, the war ended, and you come back home again, and you know, you've got to get down to the real nitty-gritty of things. And so I say, all the soldiers had gone, so I didn't revive interest in it at all. I got married, met a girl and got married, went to medical school, because I'm a physical therapist as well. Went to medical school and then, due course, had a child, and we just got the one child, and we moved down to Southampton because I lived in London. I've been appointed physiotherapist to Southampton football team, and Hampshire County cricket team, and the ice hockey team, and the speedway team, and a few other things down there. I was living the life of Riley. See, again, the comradeship thing, inadvertently or intentionally, I got partial. I keep getting involved in these things. We've got bunches of guys, like a professional football team, a professional cricket team, you see, and it's all sort of perpetuation of your army comradeship, which I'm perpetuating now. And there's a digression on this. I'm always digressing. I go to my regimental reunion every year. Some of you have heard this, I'm sorry, but there might be one or two of you who find it amusing, even touching. I go to my regimental reunion every year. They were a Yorkshire lot, and I go up to Leeds, first Saturday in October. I shall be up there again this year. 1947, these dinners, old comrades dinners started, and I've been to every one except one. I've missed one. I can't remember what happened then. And I go to these. We used to have 300 there, and now we've got 45. And there was a guy in my squadron, a little guy called Billy Prince, who was the archetypal Yorkshireman. Dour little man. Yorkshiremen are very sort of dour, you know, sort of guys. They're lovely fellas. They're the salt of the earth. And Billy, whatever you said to Billy, you'd say, "Sansa, Corporal Prince," or "Sansa, Billy," and he'd look at you, and a smile on his face, he'd say, "You what?" So you'd say it again. You'd say, "Oh, maybe you're right." And that was it. That was Billy's conversation. That was it went on like that. Year after year, I'd see Billy say, "Hi, Billy." He'd say, "All right, here, I'm all right. Oh, they're all right, all right." He said, that was it. Well, last October, I'm at the dinner, and we finish eating, and I swing round, I turn around like that, and there's Billy at the table, and he turns around, and we look at each other, and to my amazement, he put his hand on my arm. "Feather," he said, "I'm proud to have known thee." I said, "Billy, I'm proud to have known thee too." "Oh, well, that's all right then," he said. He turned around and got on with his coffee. Now, what made Billy Prince wait 50 years to tell me that he enjoyed my company during the war? I often wondered that. And this, you know, I was leading a normal civilian life, so quite unconscious of the delights I was missing. But then nobody knew of these delights in 1957 and that in England. The only people who knew about them were the odd guys in England and the odd scroobies and people over here, you see. I mean, the word hadn't got around, the gospel hadn't been preached, the infectious, insidious disease. And then, 1957, I pick up the local paper one Saturday night, and there's a picture of a worried-looking little bespectacled guy kneeling on the floor with a whole lot of 54mm figures spread out on the floor, and on the other side is an equally worried-looking lady, you see, and it said, "Tony Bath of St George's Avenue, Southampton, who fights battles with model soldiers. He has no opponents, and he has to fight against his wife, you see, Aunt Mary." So I looked at it, and the key turn. This was it, you know. I just can't tell you what happened. That was the moment, you see. So I got on the phone to him. I looked him up on the phone. I got on the phone to him. I said, "You know, you Tony Bath." That was me. He said, "Oh, Tony Bath. He's the complete opposite of me. He's a little man. He goes around, and he won't say two words if one will do, and he's an accountant." Anyway, he and I were very, very different. We don't really see each other very much now because we really had very little in common except the wargaming. We weren't the same types at all. And I arranged to go up on the Monday night to see him. Well, there again, you see, fate made a last desperate attempt to put a stop to wargaming. My car broke down on the way to his house. You see, and I was late. So I thought you weren't coming. So anyway, I went in and we talked and that, and he lent me a batch of Scroobius War Games Digest, which had just started. I think this was about the first 4 issues. I don't know, probably some of you have seen these early Jack Scroobius War Games Digest. And he lent me them, and I took them home. And I remember I sat up in bed reading them, and my wife was saying, you know, like wives do, saying, "Aren't you going to put the light out and go to sleep?" Wait a minute there, wait a minute. Put the light out, go to sleep. I thought, all right. So I put the light out, and sort of lying there, I'm thinking about this. My mind's putting model soldiers and guns and things. And then, about 5 o'clock when it got light, I sort of cautiously moved over something. Reading this, I read them and I kept reading going. And there was a marvellous thing. He says, "Oh, Jack had taken photographs. She stuck these original prints of these original photographs, and I've got all the Featherstone there." And that really got it going. And Tony Bath and I started getting together. We started fighting battles with these 54s. And then Tony knew a guy in London called Archie Cass. And Archie Cass lived in the middle of London, and he got some contact with these American manufacturers, these German manufacturers of flats, flat figures. And they used to send him every flat figure as it was made, Ockel and the different people over there used to send him every flat figure made. And Archie used to make moulds of them, long plastic moulds. They're always the same size. He was a very meticulous guy, always the same size, and always had 3 figures in. And he used to cast what he wanted. He'd give the moulds to Tony Bath, you see. And Tony Bath and I used to cast them. I tell you, we used to slave over a hot stove more than our wives did. And in the end, Tony had got all these flats, but I didn't like flats. I like to see things. I don't like looking at a lot of straight lines in front of me. And I remembered that about 2 or 3 years before, there was a hobby or toy shop in the town in Southampton. I remember seeing some boxes of soldiers in the window. So I went down there and I said, about 2 or 3 years ago, there's a box. Oh yeah, I think I remember the shed or something. So he comes back, he's got this big cardboard box, and there's 80 boxes of those Swedish African engineers figures. I don't know whether you remember them. They were 25mm or 30mm figures, and they were all painted, and they used to come in open-fronted, flat boxes. And they were originally made in Ireland, then they were made in Madeira, and then they were made in Cape Province in Bavaria. And there was all sorts in this collection. There was from American Civil War. The bulk of them, the majority, say 40% was American Civil War. The rest there was Zouaves, Guards, bands, and all sorts of bits and pieces. So I bought this lot for some stupid price, about £3 a lot or something. And I brought them home, gloated over them, and then I in a primitive sort of way, I converted them all into American Civil War figures, so that I had an American, 2 Confederate and Federal, very small armies. Well, that was it. There were no other figures around, and nobody could get any more, except Scrooby was selling it. So I was getting in touch with Scrooby and buying things, but old Jack, by my standards in England, wasn't exactly cheap, and then you've got the postage, and then we got customs duty. I never could get Jack to be dishonest and put phony customs declarations. So he was always dead honest, old Jack. Pay duty on them. And gradually, sort of, you began to build it up. And then I found these 30mm plastic figures, Spencer Smith plastic figures that some of you may remember. To some of you here, who perhaps younger or only been in the hobby sort of a mere 15 years or so, you won't remember these things I'm talking about, but the old guys, the older people will remember them, these Spencer Smith plastics. And I found, raking around, I actually managed to find this bloke in the end, this bloke, Spencer Smith, they made them. They called him Winky Smith because he had a funny eye. He used to go like this. And he used to make these figures, and he travelled for Britons. He was a traveller for Britons, and he got this absolute sort of complex that if Britons found out he was making these other figures, they'd give him the sack. So the whole thing was done very surreptitiously. And I found that there was a toy shop in Southgate in London which had got a lot of these. So I went there and I bought the stock up and bought them back. Well, then a guy started making them out in Winchester, at Wigan, near me, a fellow called Johnson. And you can still get them around in England, big bags. They're so cheap, these big bags of these figures, a bag of them. And so, of course, you've got those. And things are gradually building up, as you can see. You know, we're beginning to get things, and we're beginning to paint and all this sort of business. Well, then you began to find other people who were interested. Tony Bath and I. We then discovered Charlie Grant, who was in the British Model Soldier Society. Now, British Model Soldier Society had a war game section before the war, when a guy called Captain Sachs had made some rules, and they fought with them. And amongst the early practitioners, Charlie Grant and Brigadier Peter Young. And they were still going strong. And I joined the British Model Soldier Society, but I never fought in war games under their sort of jurisdiction. But we used to go and visit and go to people's houses for weekends. Now, there was this guy, Ed Saunders, who lived down at Taunton. Now, Ed was was in a way the Peter Gilder of his day, the early one. He was an absolute genius at making figures. I've still got a lot of the figures he made, and he used to make figures, and the bayonets were always pins. And it's always a hazardous business fighting a wargaming, because you always get your fingers pricked, and we always have some Dettol or something up there to put on these wounds that you get, because you get a pin down your fingernail or something. I had a lot of zouaves going along, and you can see about 40 pins sticking out at you. And Ed used to make these figures, and have all these armies, and then he'd get fed up with them, and he'd sell them. He sold Peter Young a whole army. Now, Ed was a great guy. I told a story yesterday about how he dug out the foundations of his house to make a war game through. And he eventually came out here. And I can't remember, his son came out here and lived here. And I had a letter from his son about a year ago. Ed had died out here, somewhere in Wisconsin, I think. It was over here anyway. I don't know whether he war gamed here, but he was one of the early ones in England. Now, he had a cousin called Lionel Tarr. And Lionel Tarr was a great lad. And his sort of speciality was that he was a loner. Lionel Tarr wouldn't wargame with his cousin Ed, and he wouldn't wargame with anybody else either, but he wargamed solo stuff. And he was absolutely mad on the German-Russian campaign, 1941 onwards, you know that. And he couldn't get any vehicles at all, so he used to make little tanks out of wood, Mark IV, German Mark IVs, Russian TS tanks and all that, and then he used to make a mould out of a reclaimable rubber, and he used to cast tanks in plaster of Paris. And he used to make the turrets separately so that they revolved. He'd paint them all. And there they were, all these little, they were about 30mm scale. And he'd have all these tanks there. And he used to have aircraft. In one of my books, two of my books has some pictures of, he'd have these aircraft, and he had them on tripods. He didn't like them on tripods, so he slung fishing nets across the room. And he used to have these aircraft in these nets. He used to sort of prod around and move them along three net spaces along and all that sort of thing. And he used to refight these battles, and he lived in Bristol. And I went to see him one time, and he asked me to go down and see him, and I went down to see him. Bristol was about 70 miles from me. And he made this model of Stalingrad, and he was fighting Stalingrad. And that was the first time I'd ever really seen top-class terrain. It was almost in the Duke Siegfried class, with all these houses, you know, street after street, and spread over quite a big area. And it was, considering that these were basic and primitive days, it was quite an achievement. And then there was Peter Young. Peter Young was also, so Peter Young was a famous commando leader. He was the most decorated British soldier of World War II, and he was fantastic. He was pale blue eyes, little silver moustache, silver hair, and he used to fix you with his eyes. And he was in charge of the history department at Sandhurst, and he was a very well educated, very intelligent, well-spoken man. And he was in the British Model Soldiers Society, and he used to go to meetings there on Friday nights, and Peter, you'd meet in a pub called the Feathers, and you'd walk in the Feathers, and there'd be Peter Young sitting there with Roy Belmont Maitland, who ran Tradition. They'd sit in the corner, and I remember walking in, and Peter Young, there was this crowded pub, and he'd be there, and he'd go, "Donald, dear boy, come and amuse me with your idle prattle." Peter Young was a marvellous soldier, and he was a good war gamer because he was completely unscrupulous. The war gaming, what kept him alive on the battlefield. And I remember he came to my house, and we fought a battle once, and I can't remember how it happened. But after a couple of moves, I mean, we got this table 8x6, a couple of moves, he got me penned in an area about as big as that, and he was surrounding me. And whatever I did, he said, "That's no good, dear boy. That's no good, dear boy." And there's a picture in one of my books, the front of this piece with Peter and I, looking across the table, and there's Peter with this innocent, beaming look at his face. He's about to cheat and do something. We used to go to his house. He lived at Yakeley, near the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. We used to go to his house there. And I went there one day to fight a war game, and there were these two young lads there, and they were corporals on the staff at Sandhurst, you see, and they were completely overawed. I mean, as they would be, the corporals there being asked to war game in the Brigadier's house, you see, because Peter Young was a legend of the British Army, absolute legend. I mean, everybody knows Peter Young. And there were these two lads there, and it was the most interesting war game, because whatever happened, whatever Peter did or said, he'd have it, "Sir!" There, boys. sir! We're not like that. And the rules kept altering. So Peter, now 2 moves ago when you did that, such thing happened when you all did that. Now I want to do it and you won't let me. Dear boy, have you a complaint to make? Well, you're not disconcerted you, but he used to fix you with his pale blue eyes. Well, yes, I have, Peter. Make it in an official manner and it will be considered. Well, 2 moves ago, listen patiently. Complaint heard and rejected, carried as before. This particular game, I remember, I can't remember what period, I think it was Mulberry, he was very interested in that period. Before I could start fighting, I had to get behind enemy lines down the road with a coach and bring my commander's mistress out of a chateau. And I had to get her out of the chateau in the bloody coach and up the road before I could even start fighting. And there's this other lot going, these guys going, sir! And moving soldiers around, Peter Young beaming and saying, I'd go around the flank if I was shooting my sir! Fantastic game. And then he moved up above his garage, moved into above his place above his garage. He had this great 20-foot square table where he used to move anything outside 6-foot range. He used to lift up a panel and sort of come up and hold the panel on your head there, move your arm and look around, move things. But Peter Young used to come up like a cyclone. And his own troops used to move about 14 inches and yours would be knocked all over the place and pushed back. You see, the tactical situation was altered every time Peter Young moved in. They were great days. They really were. I was privileged, I think, to meet Peter Young. And he said to me once, you know, dear boy, I'm a little tired and weary of this moving figures. I said, well, you don't move them, Peter. You always get guys in from the college and shout at them and they move them. I know that, he said. But wouldn't it be nice if they moved themselves? I said, yeah, I suppose it would be. So he said, I'm going to do something about it. So he did. He formed the Sealed Knot. The English Civil War Reconstruction Group. He said, well, I've done it. He said, I just snap my fingers, he said, and they go forward or they come back, he said, and I ride my horse up the lines and they all cheer and I wave my sword at them. He was a great guy, Peter Young. Well, we used to go and do all these things, we used to go to their houses and we used to, I mean, these were names in England. And you had your names over here because you had Jack Scrooby, and there were people, and they're still around. And I can think of, 5 or 6 of them. Oh, here today, you got Larry Brom is wandering around here. Got Keith Hubbard. Now, old Keith Hubbard, he used to be, I think he was a colonel in your army, and he lives out in the Catskill Mountains there. And he used to send me pictures of his war games way back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Fantastic war games there. In fact, he made me an honorary colonel in the Heart's Content Home Guard, the Catskill Mountains, and he writes me letters to Colonel Featherstone. And my postwoman always says the same thing. Colonel Featherstone, I didn't know you were a colonel, Mr. Featherstone. So I said, no, it's a post-war honour. And then you got Pat Condray. Pat Condray is one of the old greats. You've got Charlie Sweet, I saw coming yesterday. Now, Charlie Sweet at 81 is the oldest living wargamer. He's been wargaming longer than anybody in the world. And he's a great guy, you know, Charlie, he's a really great guy. And then of course you've got Duke. I mean, Duke was in at the beginning, and we're going to honour him tonight. And I advise you to come because I think it's going to be a cabaret. We used to go on these visits, and then one time I started Wargaming Youth Matter, but before I get into that, Peter Gilder, his son's upstairs now, lives in Florida, running kind of self figures. Peter Gilder, I don't quite know how I got in contact with him, but I used to go every year, as I say, I was a physical therapist, and my speciality was sports injuries. Before I'd written war games books, I wrote 9 books on sports injuries, industrial injuries and things like that. And so when people say how many books you had printed, and I say 88, I'm cheating really, because 9 of them weren't wargaming or military books. They were books like Backache and the Slip Disc, Dance Without Danger, Be Fit at 40, books like that, you see. If you're interested, I can probably get you a copy. And I used to go to Loughborough, which is a physical training college, and every year and lecture on sports injuries to the British Olympic athletes and things. And then when it finished, I always used to go across to Sleaford where Peter Gilder lived. I can't remember how we got in contact with each other, but the very first time I saw Peter Gilder, he was in plaster of Paris. He'd broken his leg cycle racing, and he discovered that this plaster of Paris would make good moulds and make figures. And Peter Gilder in those days was just getting into things, and he and I bought up every single box of Airfix Guards Band. You remember the very first Airfix figs that came out was the Guards Band. That's all you could get, you see. And we bought up every single box. We went out one day in a car, we drove around all the shops we could find in Norfolk and Norwich and all around there. We bought them all. And together, he did about 90% of it. We made an American Civil War Army out of the Guards Band, you know, cutting off trombones with razor blades and things. And that army, I was talking to Chris Gilder up there just now, talking about it. And that army, we fought a lot of battles with it. And when Neville Dickinson started miniature figurines, at one time he and Peter Gilder were together, and Neville wanted to start wargaming, and at my suggestion, he bought this army off Peter Gilder. And I said to Neville about a couple of months ago, I said, what is the army of Civil War figures, those Airfix plastic ones you bought off Peter Gilder? What happened? Well, I still got them somewhere at home. Well, I was telling Chris Gilder upstairs about it just now, and he was very interested, and he said he would, if Neville didn't want to, he would like to buy them off it. So when I get back home, I'll see what I can do, because they were really something, I think. But Peter Gilder was out of this world. He was, to my way of thinking, he was the greatest, most creative and most stimulating mind that hit British wargaming. He was really, really great. He was a nice guy. We had a convention in London. We did a Waterloo. We constructed a Waterloo. Peter Gilder supplied all the things and all the terrain. And we had all television companies there, and they were paying me facilities fees. I made a bomb out of that. And I had a stall selling my books and things like that. And my wife and my secretary went out with handbags crammed with banknotes. I remember. Peter Gilder bought all this stuff, and at the end of it, I remember he was almost giving the stuff away. I bought all the cavalry off him for some stupid price, and I still got them at home and use them. They were mostly Russell Gamage cavalry, where the horses came in two and you stuck them together, and the rider, you put the rider on the top. They had to work on them, but Peter was very good at it. Well, about this time, Scrooby doing Wargames Digest, Scrooby said, I don't know whether any of you knew Jack, I never met him, but I always got the impression from Jack, he was a little bit mercurial, he'd rush into something great enthusiasm, and he'd get fed up with it and go on to something else. And he was going to stop Wargames Digest, you see. I mean, it was like St. Peter and St. John, and the disciples saying that the Bible was going out of print or something. I mean, we just couldn't contemplate this awful thought. So to save him some work, I offered to take over half the issues. So I edited half of them, and he edited the other half. He's in this one for 2 or 3 years, and then he and I fell out because he was putting what, to me, I wanted sheer bloodthirsty wargaming articles in this, and he was putting in esoteric things about, I can't remember what they were now. And the guys who were writing them, I called them staff and command boys, you see. And Jack took exception to this description. So we had a few acerbic letters passed between us, and Jack withdrew my editorship of Wargames Digest, you see. Well, I mean, you couldn't just leave it at that. So I started Wargames Newsletter. And if you read Wargamers Newsletter, the first issues of it consist largely of vindictive editorials between Jack and I. But, well, anyway, it went on, and I expect a lot of you took it. There's a lot of subscribers there. People keep coming up to me saying, I've got all your newsletters, and I took them all. And I enjoyed doing Wargamers Newsletter. It used to have a great circulation. We used to go all over the place, and I used to love writing my editorials, and people used to contribute. And guys have been coming up to me. Terry McGurk came up and used to write me articles, and people like Gary Gygax used to write them. And funny thing on Gary Gygax, I never met this man, but I mean, as you know, he was in the Dungeons and Dragons on that in the first place, quite a character, large as life. And when I first came over, the first year I was here, was at Milwaukee. I was staying at the Hyatt Regency, and I went up one night, and I came back, something we went to, I came back and we were all in the bar, there, it was about midnight, and there was this girl in white sitting on a bar stool there, and I got talking to her. I wasn't actually chatting her up or anything, I just got talking to her because you know my friendly nature. And I like talking to Americans because they're always easy to talk to, and they talk back, and My husband's ever hit me yet. And I was talking to her, and she was going on about her husband and Gary and that. And all of a sudden, your husband isn't Gary Guy gang? Yes, Jasmine, do you know him? So I said, where is he? She said, that's him there. And there was this guy, this back. So she said, do you know him? So I said, well, look, I'll tell you what. You go up to him and whisper in his ear, Don Featherstone is standing right behind you. So she did, you see. So I don't know if you know Gary. So he swung around and said, Jesus Christ, it's the man himself. And so there we are, and we did Wargames Digest. Now my Wargames Newsletter was a family affair. I had 3 children then, and they earned their pocket money working on Wargamers Newsletter. My secretary typed it, because I also ran a clinic, you see. My secretary typed it, I was writing the books as well. My secretary typed it. We had a big duplicator. First it turned a handle, then we had an electric one. We used to run off 600 copies or whatever. Then we used to put all the pages out, and one of the kids used to collate it. Then another one stapled it, and then another one wrote the envelopes. Another one put the things in the envelopes. My wife used to help. It was a real thing. And we got that out every month from 1962 until 1980. 218 editions, and we never were late once. That was really something. And then, about 2 years from the end, Tradition, the shop in London, offered to take it over, and they turned it into what it really wasn't. They made it a printed job, and they got an advertising manager who was a pushy guy, and I found out he was making a hell of a lot more money out than ever I was. And this went on for a while, and then Roy Belmont made a new ran Tradition in Mayfair, Shepherd's Market. He decided he wasn't going to do it. Just one day, he just said, it was January 1980, I'm not doing it anymore. Well, the thing had gone too far for me to ever sort of be able to take it up and carry on with it, you see, so it stopped, and I was very sorry about that. But in a minute I'm going to say more about this, but by that time I'd written the first one, Wargames, the book Wargames. I was approached by, I was thinking about it, I would like to write a book on this, and Hutchinson, Stanley Paul of Hutchinson Group came along to me and said, would I do this book on wargaming? And I did wargaming, and then they said, well, what about naval wear? Anybody fire with ships? I said, yeah, so I did naval war. I think I fought a couple of naval battles. So I did naval wargaming, and then they said, well, what about air wargaming? I never fought an air wargame in my life, I never have. So I wrote air wargames. And war games, advanced war games campaigns, battles in model soldiers. It just went on and on like that. And I was writing about 3. There was a period of 20 years in my life, and I never had less than 3 books coming out a year. And it's great fun. And I'm still writing at them. I've got this book coming out any moment now, Khaki and Red. Castles are doing it, about the Russians coming through Samarkand in the Khyber Pass, Persian Samarkand in the last century, trying to get into India. I've got a novel coming out in later on called Redcoats and the Raj, and I've probably got a book coming out called Valor Knows No Bounds, about early BC winners, about 15 BC winners, including one of those who had forfeited it for going to prison, the only clergyman who ever win one of the 3 civilians who won it, and it's quite an interesting sort of thing. And so I just keep on writing, and I love doing this sort of thing. I write articles, got an article coming out in Command magazine any time now, and they Life and Times of the Victorian Soldier, and I love doing that. Well, by this time I'd got my War Games gang going really well. We've got the same guys coming fighting and wargaming. Peter Manning, who was designing for Dickinson, was one of them. He was as I said yesterday, he was an arch cheat. Quite unwittingly, he didn't do a vindictive anything, it just came natural to him. He always moved 10 inches when it was an official 6-inch move and all that, you know, and he never knew what he was throwing on the dice. He used to scoop them up quickly and that. So all our rules were Manning proof. And that's a standing joke in England now. People still say, my rules are Manning proof. But he was a nice guy. He knew we used to kid him, but he never took offence at it. And we had my wargaming gang, and they used to come, and they come every Wednesday night. And I came over here last Friday, yesterday week, and we had a war game on the Wednesday before with the same guys. And as I said yesterday, and you know, the thing that I say with some feeling, my little son Peter, when he was 2, he used to stagger up the stairs and back stairs to the room, and we'd lift him up, show him the soldiers. and that. And when he was killed, 26 years later, the same 5 guys came to his funeral. So that is a measure of how long, and that was 5 years ago. And they're still all coming. We're all getting older together. It's great. And we had a lot of visitors from America. I had Duke came over once, and came bursting into my house like a cyclone. And Jeff Perrin came. He's a wargamer of one of Duke's crowd. Joe Morshozu was one of the early wargamers. He wrote a book. He came over once too. And he had this system of some mountain, some way with squared terrain, squared boards. A guy called Newell Chamberlain from St. Louis, who I tried to trace when I was in St. Louis 2-3 months back, but I couldn't find him in the phone book. Bob Jones, who's here now, he came in when we were saying to me the other night. I'd forgotten he came in, he was a naval officer, and he came in to see me. And a guy from Canada called Gerard de Grey, I think he's one of Vietnam's disciples. Gerard de Grey was a professor in Ontario, and he worked in, he was a professor at university. I think it was something, either Waterloo University or Waterloo Road. I know the name Waterloo came into this somewhere. And he came over, he came to he had this business with Napoleonic stuff, with hexes. And he came over and he came as a guest to our dining club. And the dining club, the principle is any of you will see if you come, we have a guest, and the guest has no commitment. He doesn't have to pay, and he doesn't have to give a lecture or talk or anything. He just sits there, and when we do it relatively formally in that we have the Lord toast, the Queen, then we toast have some friends, and we have grace before we start, we sit down. And then I always ask the guest just a few questions about his military background. I formally introduce him, say, you've all met our guest, but he is so-and-so, and he used to be in the non-such Lancers, and I sort of say a little bit about him, you see, and this guy says a little bit. Well, Gerard de Grey started, and he went on, and he went on, and he went on, and an hour and a half later, he was still going on. I mean, you can't be too rude, can you? You can't say, shut your bloody mouth. So anyway, there he was, and all of a sudden, we used to have this dinner in a Royal Naval Reserve officers' mess. Over the tannoy came away. With the owner of cars, so please come down immediately. So one of our members was a reserve lieutenant there in the Navy. And he said, that's my car. So he goes dashing out, you see. And he comes back a few minutes later and he's distraught. He'd got this Alfa Romeo or some really exotic car. And some French lorry driver had backed his trailer into it or gone over it or something. And he couldn't speak French, and he was having a lot of trouble with this lorry driver, you see. And he was going, anyway, so Gerard de Grey said, I speak French, I'll help you. And he got up and went out. And he never came back, and we never saw him again. I don't know whether this French lorry driver threw him in the water, or what happened to him. We never ever saw Gerard de Grey again. And we had conventions. The very first wargame convention ever held was held in my house, 69 Mill Lane, Southampton. There were 14 of us there. And there was Ed Saunders, Peter Young, David Chandler, Charlie Grant, Charles Reevely, and all Tony Bath, all names, wargaming names. We had this tournament there, and it was great. Then the next year we went to a hotel around the corner called the Lambert, and we had a bit more there. We had a supper there, and we got a hold of an overhead projector. And we showed the Battle of Hook's Farm from Wells' book on a screen there, and we talked about it, and all sort of beginning the thing. And then we got a bit bigger, and we took a big suite, great chance at a hotel further down the road called the Cotswold. Now I live in the same road as the Cotswold in, and I was in there the other night after a war game with Roger Snell, one of my regular war gamers. And as we walked out, I said the first wargaming convention ever held was held in that room because it was a bit like that. He said, who's organised it? I said, I did, of course. It was held in this room there, and we had the first National War Games Championship, and I got a trophy for silver salver from Airfix. I don't know whatever happened to it. They may still be fighting for it. And the London group won it. The rules were that the group that won it had got to run the next year's convention. So the thing slipped out of my grasp and London won it. But we had a dinner that night, and the management of the hotel gave us 6 bottles of champagne, 5 mini bottles and 1 big bottle. So we gave the mini bottlers a rounder's price or something, and we gave the big bottle to any. Oh, I know. We gave the mini bottles to any wargamers' wives who fought with their husband, battles with wargame battles with their husband. You know, wargames battles, not the other sort. And then the big bottle went to any wargaming wife who fought a wargame with her husband and beaten him and won. I remember Mary Barth, Tony Barth's wife, got this big bottle of champagne, mostly because neither of them drank. That was good, and they were the first. So this thing really was spawned, in a sense, in '69 in Lane with our little convention when you get together. But this is mankind. Mankind is a gregarious animal. You have to get together with your fellows, don't you, and sort of organise and do all these things. We started going on battlefield trips. We went to Scotland, 9 of us in 1972. We went to Culloden and went all over the place. And we went to the Edinburgh Tattoo. And we couldn't find any accommodation. There was this 9 of us. And we finally found this boarding house. It was a great big Georgian, sort of 5 or 6 story house. And there was a woman there, Mrs. Finney. And she said she could put us up. Well, it was the dingiest place you've ever been in. And it had a big light, one electric light hanging on a bowl with nothing. We straight away christened it Mrs. Finney's Dungeons. We went off to see the tattoo, and when the tattoo finished, we went and had something to eat, and we sort of looked at each other and said, I don't fancy going back to Mrs. Finney's Dungeons. She'd given us a key, it was sort of a cellar down in the basement. So I remember we were walking along and we saw this film show that was on, going on at midnight, and it was Marlon Brando and The Godfather. So we all flocked in to see The Godfather there. Well, they're a bit uninhibited in Scotland, and we were all sitting there watching it, and there was a guy and a girl there sitting next to me in this seat there, and they did the lot, in a sexual sense, from start to finish. And they sat next to me in the seat there, and I'm watching The Godfather like this. Marlon Brando's up there as, you know, whatever he is, and there's one scene, and he's going up, and he's going, you know what he does. And there's this drunken Scotsman. He keeps standing like saying, "Oh, to get away me, and here, he says like saying, "Shut up," and pulling him down. You see, then Marlon Brando saying, "He's like, oh, to here, and it was the most amazing cinema I've ever been in. And we still talk about Mrs. Finney's Dungeons up in Scotland. And, then we did the books and all that, and then of course, 1988, I got invited over to Gen Cons in Milwaukee, and this new era in my life began when I made the acquaintance of all you illustrious gentlemen. I'm not going to praise you too much now because I'm going to say a bit tonight. And then I got the Historicon in '89, I got the Scrooby Award, and then I found out about this lot, Hatsoft in Kansas City. I used to read about this Hatsoft group, and I used to think they're an interesting lot. And we're a lot. After a couple of years, I found out that Hatsoft stands for the Heart of America Tactical and Strategical Order of the Followers of Featherstone. Well, my wife thought this was the greatest joke she'd ever heard in her life. And I was very honoured with this thing, and I've been over there a couple of times and seen it since. And it's very interesting, really, because, as some of you possibly know, Sam Gill, who runs it, they tell me that they fight these war games, and if anything goes wrong, he calls them to attention and says in a ringing voice, sort of clarion notes, "In God's name, what would Don do now?" You see, and sometimes they phone me up. And the phone rings at some weird hour. My wife answered, "It's one of your acolytes from America." I get over there and it's great. And it's great coming here. But I'm going to say more about that in my speech tonight. And you know, as I say, we're gregarious animals and we like each other's company, don't we? We like all this mixing around. Now, I think that I'm 77 and I feel about 40. And I charge around like a raving maniac, and I swim and I run and I come over here and I write the books and I run the clinic and everything. And I intend to keep on doing it. And I wish I didn't know how old I was, because knowing how old I am worries me. If I didn't know how old I was, I think I was about 50 and I'd be quite happy. But it's because I'm mixed with guys like you, because I'm mixed with younger people, because you put into me, you instill into me the fervour of youth or the fervour of enthusiasm that you've all got. And you've got it over here. At your convention, you've got it so much. I've been to Salute and Colours in England, and they're nice, everybody's a little bit restrained when they walk around. But I mean, whoever saw a and I say this with complete respect, and please don't hold it against me, whoever saw such a weird looking assortment of people as there are out there, every dress, shape, size, everything, isn't there? It's fascinating. You know, I feel like going around taking photographs, showing my wife there, I told you, didn't I? And you know, it's really great. Now, what I thought I'd like to do, I've been talking to you about all this. Now, I'd like to sort of prove something about this. I was looking through some papers a little while ago, and I came across a copy of Wargames Digest that I used to edit with Scrooby from March 1962. Now, it included an article recalling when wargaming was in its infancy, when most British wargamers knew each other personally. Their friendship and enthusiasm was recorded by this article, which reminded me very nostalgically of the depth of feeling and the lifestyle it encouraged then and now. So here it is in all its glory. I've called it, Was It Really 30 Years Ago? So, this is it. Sitting idly reviewing events of the past year, I was struck by the amazing number of interesting things that have happened to me wargames-wise since December 1960. And we're talking about 35 years ago. I have always realised that the hobby had brought me untold pleasure, but did not anticipate so many varied events resulting from collecting model soldiers and fighting battles with them. So here we are, here's the year, January. Waited with some interest to see who won a rather comic race between commercial television and British Broadcasting Corporation, both trying to be first to screen in magazine programmes some film stuff taken in my wargames room. Commercial TV One made a very good job of animating covering artillery with the most realistic background and battle noises. The BBC did a more restrained job, but both of the programmes resulted in a lot of correspondence with would-be collectors and a lot more wargamers. And I remember the guy who did it for commercial television, he took 145 frames of some cavalry charging up a hill at a gun. And when it came on television, you could see all this cavalry going up the hill like that and round the gun. It was absolutely brilliant. You know, it said it all happened, and I was sitting in the chair bounced up down it. February, interviewed by the Manchester Guardian, the Daily Herald, and the American Forces paper Stars and Stripes, all with pictures, and all calculated to win friends and influence people with wargaming interest. Carried on with the campaigns of January, both in my house and at Tony Bath's. Think I won the Franco-Prussian War about here, but I lost Rome in the Punic War. 5 lights, 2 cameras, 6 technicians, a director, interviewer MacDonald Hastings, who is the father of Max Hastings, who is now the war correspondent and the editor of Daily Telegraph. Interviewer MacDonald Hastings and myself crowded into my small wargames room to film the usual setup of BBC's Tonight programme. Setup was a fight for Little Round Top. Questions were the usual novice type, and the resulting film again brought letters and a lot more enthusiasm. Exciting phone call from CBS of New York, who seemed to think I was the man they wanted to make a scale model of Gettysburg battlefield. Not less than 6 feet by 3 feet in size, and I had 2 days in which to do it. They phoned me Friday and they wanted it Monday. Well, what happened? I read this and I'll tell you what happened. Succeeded and made it. Took it down to the home of Field Marshal Montgomery, where it was used in the film he made for CBS with Henry Steele Comacher, the American historian, discussing the American Civil War. A most stimulating day spent in and around Monty's desert caravans and marvelling at the great man's effervescence. Well, they asked me to do this, and there was a guy called Lane Slate, the American guy. Now, he was a well-known producer at that time. He was the guy who made a television film which achieved a lot of fame. Jackie Kennedy took the television cameras around the White House, and at that time it achieved both in England, I believe, over here, a lot of attention. And they wanted this model made because they were coming over and they bring in Henry Steele Comacher, and you know him, he wrote The Blue and the Grey, marvellous man. And they were going to, Montgomery and he were going to talk about the Battle of Gettysburg. Montgomery, of course, was speaking with a great deal of knowledge and a great deal of depth because he had spent an afternoon there on Eisenhower's farm, Gettysburg. So consequently, by Monday standards, he was an authority on the Battle of Gettysburg. So we get, I made this one, I took a door off its hinges, see, and I bought all the plasticine I could find in all the toy shops, and I made this Cemetery Red, Little Round Top, Big Round Top, the Peach Orchard. I made it all on there, and I was very careful with it, you see. And I couldn't think of a way of getting it down there. Well, a friend of mine in my Roger Club was the current mayor of Southampton, and he had a big station wagon. So we hitched into this station wagon, and we were told that when we got to Alton, where Montgomery lived in his mill at Islington, we must join the convoy of vehicles in the lane, and we weren't to be admitted to Montgomery's house till sharp on the dot of 9 o'clock. So we get there, you see, and the convoy goes in, and there's all the television guys setting up everything, doing this and putting that together. You know the way they carry on and do it, copies of them. And this Lane Slate is introduced, I'm introduced to him, and then he takes me and Rich Haskell, the Mayor of Southampton, up to meet Monty, you see. Oh, but before that, there was this guy, sort of turned out to be Monty's Batman. He was a brisk sort of man going around and don't touch that, and go over there and be this and all that, you see. And then the great man appeared. Corduroy trousers, roll collar pullover, brown hair, suede boots, you see. And he came out and he stood and watched us all like that. See, and we were introduced to him. So Lane Slate said, "Oh, Phil Marshall, I'd like you to meet Donald Featherstone, who's made this model of the Batman." Well, I was wearing a Royal Tank Regiment tie, brown, red and green. And he looked, once he looked at me, down, I'm standing there at attention, you see. Because, you know, I took a lot of respect for high ranks, standing there at attention. I was only a sergeant, standing there to attention, and he looked at me and said, "Royal Tank Regiment?" So I said, "Yes, sir." "Were you in my army?" I said, "No, sir, first army." He said, "Hard luck." Well, this was the day. Monty's there, and we got this great model out, and I'm up in one of the caravans. Monty's, he had a big Dutch gun on there, you see, you know, in these caravans in this car, and I'm up in this caravan there, and I'm pointing out there. Monty's rabbiting on about this and that, and I'm saying the camera. And they're panning onto this and they're panning onto that, you see, and going around. And poor old Henry Stookholm was just trying to get words in, and Monty's saying, "And then Longstreet was a fool. He was a fool. If I'd have fought Longstreet, I'd have hit him for a 6. He was carrying on like this, and going on contact. "Well, Phil Marshall, with respect." No, I weren't here, And this was an amazing quote. I don't know if I've ever gotten the air over here, but it was a hell of a thing. And this went on like that. And we broke off for lunch, and then we came back and we carried on with this thing. And at half past, oh yes, before we started, Monty's prowling around looking at everything very interestedly, and he sees these cablers going into the house like that. See, what are they? "Oh, they're the power for a camera or something." "Where are they going to?" "Plugged this up." "My electricity supply." Hold everything. So they had to send 15 miles into Alton to get a meter reader from the electricity company to come out and read the meter. Then they had to come back at 5:30 and read it again, and they gave Monty £45 or something. £5:30, still watching. "Well, 5:30. The contract says I only have 5:30. They said, "Well, just Phil Marshall, we're just finishing. All we want you to do now, as we say this and that, we want you to point to the place." No. I'm going. "Good night, gentlemen. Pleasure to meet you." And off he went, you see. So what can I do now? So they all looked at me. So there's only one man who knows all the place, that's you. So I became Monty's hand. I'm on my hand and I'm pointing across all this to the sea. That was Monty's hand. So that was one of the sort of things that came out of wargaming, you see, and it was great. So then we came on to April. Now that was a month of our convention. I don't remember which one, but it says here, month of the convention. Great, stimulating, provocative and inimitable. We hope to have another one next year. Appeared on TV with Brigadier Peter Young when we gave publicity to the convention. I remember we were on this magazine programme. Peter Young was a hell of a man. And there was this very attractive woman. She was quite one of the leading British show jumpers. I can't think of her name now, but she was well known in her day. She was a real dolly. And old Peter Young was doing, let me be an uncle to you stuff, put his arm around her shoulder. "No, my dear, when I was a lad." I remember very well with her too, but I think she managed to get away while we were on the camera. And he's a great guy. I remember on the same night, he had his wife with him. We went to an Indian restaurant. That's right, an Indian restaurant. And his wife said, "We'd like an Indian meal, Mr. Person. Can you recommend it?" So I said, "Yeah, Pride of India. Let's go there." So we went there, you see. So Peter Young was like so many other well-known people. He was so mean. He would never buy a round of drinks or anything like that, you see. And on this particular occasion, when they brought the bill, he gave it to me. So his wife said, "What did you give it to Don for?" He said, "Well, Don invited us. He's paying." I said, "Oh no, no." She said, "He's not." No, he said, "You're paying. You." Oh no, he said. So in the end, we split it. I remember. And yeah, absolutely typical of that. And he was sitting. We were sitting there, and I said to him about the war. I said, "Do you remember, Peter, how many men you killed?" Well, he said, "I remember killing about 12, he said, actually killing and seeing them die." He said, "But I must have killed a lot more, I didn't see actually fall." And he was going on about this, and I was sort of curried poison in my mouth, listening to these terrific stories. So I said, "Were you ever frightened?" Because I went through 6.5 years of war in mortal terror. I couldn't imagine anybody could ever go through a war without being frightened. "Only once, dear boy, only once." Apparently on D-Day, he was going across with the 3 Commando Brigade in landing craft, and they blundered into some fleet of German E-boats, or E-boats blundered into it. And Peter Young said, I was so helpless, he said, "We had no weapons." He said, "The weapons were stashed away at the back of the thing." He said, "We had no weapons." He said, "And that I was frightened." And he said, "But they didn't see us and we got away with it." So that was Peter Young. So here we come on to it. Now, this is still April. Asked by Hutchinson's and publishers to write a book on war games. Began book. That was it. War games. Stonewall Jackson began to chase up the valley, followed by Tony Barr's Federals. In spite of my doubling on my tracks, the Union boys were a little too much for me. May. Visited Warwick, Howes and Peter Pringle in Chatham. They were a couple of little war games, where a most interesting weekend was spent discussing the usual hobby subjects. Watched the demonstration of Napoleonic battle between Warwick and Peter, listened to new curses and varied lines of argument over rules. Fought Warwick next morning with Peter as umpire. Good battle in which history was altered, and I discovered an even stronger defensive formation in the British square. I remember I drove away from them, we weren't really speaking, because I claimed that if I had treble lines of troops in between 2 houses with their flanks on 2 houses, that there's nothing in the rules said that I could ever be beaten. So I said it's stronger than a square. Well, they didn't like this. Drove to Bristol with Roy Black of the Sea Lionel Tar. This is the guy who made the model of Stalingrad, whose modern setup and application never fails to amaze me. Learned a lot. Returned home very stimulated and full of admiration for this great stalwart of our hobby. Continued fighting battles with Tony Barr, won and lost about my usual number. Wrote the book in my spare time. June. Peter Young visited me, and we spent a very hot Sunday fighting a war game between Federals and Confederates. At the end of it, I knew how Peter had become a great brigadier, won so many medals and stayed alive during World War II. It was a good, hard and drawn battle, and we fought to my rules. Continued with the book, fought more battles with Tony Barr, spent a week on holiday, during which I found a shop that sold airfix model tanks. So I bought and made a dozen of men mash during spare times off the beach. Well, I'm sure you all know that. You go on holiday with your family and spend most of the time painting salt, isn't it? July had a most interesting Mulgarian battle at Peter Young's house, when he cunningly made himself umpire, and I fought a 3-cornered battle with Ian Bale and David Nash. It lasted from 11 AM until 7 PM when I conceded the game. I attached no blame whatsoever to the gargantuan quantities of excellent food provided by Mrs. Young and the liquor by the Brigadier. He also bore me no malice for so violently arguing about his rules. He was the most flexible umpire. Spent a lot of time chasing photographers, taking shots of stage battles for my book. August. Events this month were a little crowded off the screen by the arrival of another little Featherstone. A boy this time, right by the time I go into the press, shows absolutely no aptitude for wargaming. Book nearly completed, photographers go bankrupt and make life even more difficult. September. Visited Bill Gunston at his home in North Wales. He was home on leave from Kuwait. Bill Gunston, as I mentioned yesterday, was a fervent character who worked in Kuwait, had a lot of money. He used to descend on war games in England like the plague. And boy, he was a terrible man. Drove 256 miles each way, glorious scenery, then drove another 120 miles to find a shop in that uncivilised part of the world that sold airfix figures. Shop that sold airfix figures. Bill's army had not arrived from Kuwait, but he had bought lots of modern plastic stuff on his way home via Germany. So we decided to buy some boxes of 00 gauge figures and fight the modern battle. I wasn't going to drive over 500 miles and not have a war game. Finally got them in land though. We had our battle on a dining room table and the last sideboard, 18 inches high, so an intriguing sloping terrain was used. Book went to publishers. I received part of the advance royalties, fought more battles with Tony and lost more than I won. Now, getting back to this visit to Bill Gunson. This wasn't the one. There was another visit to Bill Gunson, and Peter Gilder was involved in this. And his son upstairs probably knows this story. And it's been around this, so I've told over here before. There was myself, Peter Gilder, Bill Gunson, and a guy called Gibb McCall. Now, Gibb McCall was the crime correspondent for the Manchester Daily Mail, and he was quite a sharp, sly boy. And it was Peter Gilder and I against Gibb McCall and Gunson. We were fighting a Napoleonic battle. And Gunson had these thousands of figures, mostly Hinton Hunts by then. And we got this table set out, and there was a long wall right across it. Well, we had 120 riflemen, light division riflemen, and we got them all along this wall, all kneeling down there. And Gunson had about 500 cavalry. So he said, I'm going to charge you. So he brings his cavalry across the table, you see, and they finish up about an inch, half an inch or an inch in front of the wall. So he said, I'm mellying you here. What do you mean you're mellying us? Didn't reach us. So he looks at us, he said, yeah, I'm mellying you. And he said, but look, you're half an inch or an inch short of us. You can't reach, you haven't reached, you haven't made contact. He said, they're leaning over their horses, they're slashing at with their sabres. So old Gilder and I dissolved in a screaming fits of laughter as he leaned over. So Gunson said, well, are you going to let me have it? No, we're not, he said. But it's my house, it's my war game.
I can't remember that.
Sorry, Bill, no, we're not going to. He said, you, in a slight inversion of fact, he said, you inhospitable bastards. So this is when the great wargaming legend occurred. There's Gilder and I standing there, and there's a wall, and there's a table there, and Gunson goes, like that, tips the whole lot up, and it all comes shoveling down. And I have never before or since stood there up to the knees in terrain and model soldiers. And Gilder and I stand at the back there, there's all these figures in that, and Gunson storms out the room. We're all three standing looking at each other. So we sort of picked our way through the terrain and the figures and said, what are we going to do now? Oh well, let's get him down and set it up again, you see. So we go up and we bang this window. Go on, Pete, go on, Bill, we'll be alright. Go away, go home, bugger off. Well, this was Saturday afternoon, I think. We never saw him again. He didn't come out of his room, he stayed in his room there, so we all went home. But I don't know who cleared the figures up in the terrain, but that was one of the funniest things. I used to see Peter Gilder, and I always said, do you remember the time we stood knee deep in figures? That was quite good fun. Tony and I, Bill Gunson drove 256 miles to spend a weekend with me. Highly delighted because he did it half an hour quicker than I did when I went to him. Aided by Charles Reevely, home from Aden. Now he's still around, Charles Reevely, I'm not sure his name the other day. Roy Blackman and Tony Bright, we fixed up the war game to end all war games. Used an L-shaped table, 16 by 12 by 6, with the two armies of 1,200 men each. We fought for 9 hours with the rear and chief Buffy on one side of it. No result, and a fervent desire to fight small-scale battles in future. Tony and I began the Boer Revolt of 1885, in which the Boers, aided by a Zulu rising and the Boer Republic, attempted to throw the British out in Natal. The British, being scattered in various towns and garrisons, found it hard to concentrate, but aided by gunboats and landing passes, made a good fight of it. November, Boer rising is still going strong. Tony curses the civilians and livestock he has to shepherd to safety, and my Boers, usually known as Confederates in other battles, have a couple of small, Confederates make good Boers, don't they? Have a couple of small successes, 2 big defeats. Soldier magazine send down staff photographer. We have great fun faking shots for an article in the January edition. Carry on fighting battles with Tony at his house. Jungle warfare now. Lots of time spent sorting out a fabulous collection of SAE, Swedish Appling Engineers, 30mm stuff bought from Bill Gunson, who's now gone over to 20mm figures. And most of the stuff I've got from my 30mm figures are all original Gunsons. December, sit here typing this stuff for the March War Game Digest. War rising still going on. Tony has got a very fair native rising in his mythical continent, and my savages had fun last week raiding settlements, cutting the throats of soldiers disguised as women settlers. That's a new thought theme, isn't it? No, during this past year, I've also endeavoured to earn a living. My wife and children have become accustomed to such luxuries as food and clothing. I've read a large number of books on military subjects, painted and made a considerable number of figures, done some high-class swapping with various fellow collectors, and carried on correspondence with even more of them, many of them American. Well, that was 1 year, that was 1962, so you can see how by that time, in 5 years, Wargaming had gripped my life. So, you know, when I talk like this, I'm talking in a sheer nostalgic style. And I lay myself open to the charge of living in the past. I mean, you might think that I'm preaching to today's war games. You might think that I'm thinking it was all better than it is now, and I don't think that at all. I'm just reviving happy memories. I'm reviving stimulating memories of days that will never return. See, it's all right saying, as you get older, it's all right saying you've got these lovely happy memories of the past, but it's also saddened and you're made melancholy by the fact that they're gone. It's never going to happen again. We're never going to do all these things. I mean, there's never going to be another Gunser to chuck your knees in figures. There's never going to be another Peter Young or anything. It's really good. I'll read my last concluding bit because I'll probably come back. Wargaming is a many-featured thing, a lifelong hobby and a pursuit offering friendships and pleasure beyond the dreams and expectations aroused by buying a few model soldiers. Thank you, ladies.